Okay, so today's lecture is going to talk about unemployment. Now, unemployment is a subject that a lot of people have feelings and thoughts about, but very few people have sort of an actual understanding of what unemployment actually is in terms of the BLS, or the Bureau of Labor Statistics definition. Okay, so there's a few terms that we're going to have to go over at first. Okay, so people who are employed. This is anyone over the age of 16 who is able to work and has done so for pay. Okay. Now, there are a few caveats to this. Full-time college students who are working typically do not count as employed because we don't count full-time college students towards employment statistics. People who work for their family's business, they can work full-time, not for pay, and still be considered employed. Okay, so there are a few caveats to this, but in general, someone is considered employed if they are over the age of 16 and they're able to work and they have done so for pay. People who are unemployed, these are people, this is anyone over the age of 16 who is able to work but is not working, and has been actively, and that's the key, looking for a job. Okay, so the key here is the word actively. So someone is unemployed only if they meet all of these criteria. So they have to be over the age of 16, they have to be able to work, they have to not be currently working, but they have to be actively looking for a job. And if they don't meet all of these criteria, they are not considered unemployed. Okay, so like my grandmother, she is over the age of 16, she probably is still able to work, she is not working, but she is not actively looking for a job. So my grandmother does not count as unemployed. When you graduate from college, let's say you graduate from college and you start your job search immediately. During that time, you will be over the age of 16, you're able to work, you are not currently working, you are actively looking for a job. So recent college grads who do not have a job lined up after college would be considered unemployed. The next category, or the next description we'll go over, is what we call discouraged workers. A discouraged worker is, for simplicity, we could say it's a person over 16 who is able to work, would like to work, right? So they're not currently working, but they would like to, but has given up trying to find a job. So a discouraged worker is basically, you can think of a discouraged worker as someone who was classified as unemployed, but has given up even trying to find a job. Okay, so discouraged workers do not count as unemployed workers, even though they would like to work and they're not currently working. They don't count as unemployed because they are not actively looking for a job. The labor force is the sum of the employed and the unemployed. Okay, so basically it's equal to the number of employed people plus the number of unemployed people. Okay, so that is the labor force. Notice that discouraged workers are not in the labor force. Okay, so if someone is a discouraged worker, they do not count as in the labor force. They are just out of the labor force. Okay. To calculate the unemployment rate, this is equal to the number of unemployed divided by the labor force. And if you want, you can multiply it by 100. Okay? So if you notice, once again, discouraged workers are not included in this. So if all of the people who are currently unemployed gave up looking for work, the unemployment rate would be 0. Right? So one strategy, if you wanted to be a total monster and didn't care about ethics or morality or anything like that, one strategy that we could adopt to reduce the unemployment rate would be to go down to the unemployment office and try to discourage as many of those people from applying for jobs as possible, right? You could tell them terrible things about themselves, all kinds of awful things, which obviously are not true, but you could do that and the unemployment rate would go down to 0. Okay, so this reminds me of a time when I worked for the Joint Economic Committee in 2010 when President Obama wanted to achieve an unemployment rate of less than 8%. In July of 2010, the unemployment rate, if memory serves, hit 7.8%. So he achieved his goal, but the problem that we identified was that the number of discouraged workers had increased over the last few months, and that was driving the decrease in the unemployment rate. Okay, so there are problems with calculating the unemployment rate, namely that they don't take into account discouraged workers. Okay, but there are other problems as well. Okay, so the unemployment rate, so let's consider some problems. Okay, so there are problems with using the unemployment rate. So one, doesn't tell us how many people gave up looking for work. So no discouraged workers. Okay, so we don't include discouraged workers. That's a big problem. The second one doesn't tell us anything about how hard people are looking. Okay, so the unemployment rate doesn't tell us anything about the effort levels that the unemployed are putting towards finding a new job. Some people who are unemployed obviously work very hard to find a new job, and they do so very quickly, or at least relatively quickly. Others do the bare minimum to be classified as unemployed, right? And both of these people count equally towards the unemployment rate. So it doesn't tell us anything about the effort levels of people. Okay, it doesn't tell us anything about underemployment. All right, underemployment can mean one of two things. It either means that we have people who are perhaps overqualified for a job. So think about all the college graduates who are currently working at Starbucks pouring coffee. Not that there's anything wrong with that type of a career, but I imagine that very few people go to college with the goal being to become a barista. Okay. Also, we can think of underemployment as people who are currently working, let's say, 30 hours per week, but would much rather work 40 hours per week. Right? So they aren't getting enough hours that they aren't getting the number of hours that they would like. Okay, so these people typically have to go work a second part-time job just to make ends meet, when if they could work one full-time job, that would be sufficient for them. Okay, so it doesn't tell us anything about underemployment. Fourth problem tells us nothing about job growth. All right, so the unemployment rate by itself doesn't tell us anything about the rate of job growth in the economy, and so this might be a useful thing, because if jobs are shrinking, the unemployment rate might go up, might go down, depends on what's happening with people who are unemployed. But the rate itself doesn't tell us anything about job growth whatsoever. And then the fifth one is sort of getting at the overall unemployment rate, and that is that it isn't broken down by demographics. Okay, now I should be fair here and say that we can break these things down by demographic groups. We can break them down by race, gender, age, educational attainment, but the unemployment rate itself, so like when we say the U.S. unemployment rate is 5% or 6% or whatever it is right now, that rate itself does not tell us anything about demographic information. We would have to pull that information out through other measures. Okay? Now, this doesn't mean that the unemployment rate is a useless statistic. It just means that we need to understand clearly what it's actually saying. And there are reasons why some people don't count towards the labor force and by extension unemployed. Right? We don't count college students because they're in school. And if you think about it, if we counted college students, it could be the unemployment rate could be astronomically high. So typically, people between the ages of 20 and 24, we mostly ignore them for unemployment rates purposes. Okay? We don't count people in the military as employed or in the labor force. We don't count people who are retired because they're not looking for work. And so there's a number of people that are not counted towards the labor force or toward the unemployment rate. And there are good reasons for most of them. The military one is a bit strange, but it could be fair. So now within this, there are three types of unemployment, and possibly a fourth one. And you'll see why I say there's three, but basically four. So there are three types of unemployment. Okay, the first one is what we call frictional. Okay, so frictional unemployment is short-term, between jobs. It's the short-term unemployment where you're just between jobs. Okay, so one example, my dad lost his job in 2004 and was unemployed for about 8 months while he was looking for a job. He found a new one, but during those 8 months, he was considered frictionally unemployed. You can also think of frictional unemployment as sort of being unemployment largely, and I'll put that in parentheses, by choice. Okay, so a lot of people who are frictionally unemployed are unemployed by choice, which means that they're between jobs, that they've accepted a new job but it hasn't started, or they voluntarily left their old job because they were sick of their boss, or their job went away because of the change in the seasons, right? So when I was in college, I washed boats during the summer. And so during the fall, winter, and spring, I would have been unemployed because no one wants their boat washed during those months. They only want them washed during the summer. Okay, people who groom ski hills are unemployed in the summer months because there's no snow, right? And so they're unemployed because of basically their own choice. Okay, there are places where those people could work, and instead they are choosing to remain unemployed. Okay, and we'll kind of come back to frictional unemployment when we juxtapose it to the other two types, so you can get sort of a better understanding. Okay, the second type is what we call structural unemployment, and this is the result of a mismatch between the skills workers have and the skills employers want. Okay, so we can think of animators from the let's say 50s, making all of the classic Disney movies. Okay, so Cinderella was originally drawn by hand, and today we don't do too much animation by hand. It's all done basically by computer. And so when the computer came into being, a lot of animators lost their jobs because they had skills, but the employers no longer valued those skills. Okay, we can think of people who raise horses, who bred horses, back in the day before the invention of the car. Okay, so with the invention of the car and Henry Ford's Model T, fewer people needed horses to get around. And so the demand for skilled horse breeding decreased dramatically. Now, obviously, there are still some horse breeders today, but I submit to you that there are far fewer today than there were in, say, 1850, especially when we control for the number of people that there are, the population. Okay, so we can also think of welders who lost their jobs at the automotive plants because of the robots that now do the welding. Right, these are all forms of structural unemployment. Right, and the basic idea actually comes from a guy named Joseph Schumpeter, who wrote a book in 1942 called Creative Destruction. Right, where he says that the basic idea of any advanced society or economy is to find ways to cut the cost of production, and the easiest way to do that is to try to mechanize labor. Okay, so the more we can mechanize labor, the more we can save money on labor. And so what this does is it destroys old jobs, but it creates new ones. Okay, so we think about the city of Grand Rapids, Michigan, which used to be known as the wooden furniture capital of at least the Midwest, if not the world. And today, the wooden furniture industry in Grand Rapids has largely collapsed, and instead we are a beer city. Okay, so Schumpeter would describe this as a new technology, automated the construction of wooden furniture, destroying those jobs, but creating new jobs in brewing. Okay, and so the great thing about creative destruction is that it lowers the cost of goods and gives us new jobs and new products that we can enjoy. The third and what I consider the final type of unemployment is cyclical unemployment. And what this is it's the result of the business cycle. Okay, so Ford Motor Company laying people off between 2007 and 2009, and then rehiring them in 2009. This would be cyclical unemployment, because the reason why these people were laid off was because of the business cycle. Okay, and so during recessions, the basic idea is that businesses can't or don't need as many employees as they used to, because they're not selling as many products. And so they lay people off due to the bad economy. Right? This would be cyclical unemployment. And note that cyclical doesn't mean like an annual pattern. It just means that there is, it has to do with the business cycle. Right? This could be annually. This could be every decade. It depends again on the business cycle itself. Okay? It does not mean seasonal, which is the fourth sort of type of unemployment, which is classified as seasonal. Okay, this is changing seasons. Okay, so changing seasons can lead to different jobs being valuable or not valuable. The reason why I don't really consider it a type of unemployment is because I think all seasonal unemployment is frictional unemployment. I think that they're basically the same, or rather that seasonal is a type of frictional unemployment. But some people like to split this off as a fourth type of unemployment, and that's fine. I don't see the value in talking about seasonal unemployment instead of frictional, but there's potential that someone would mention seasonal, and so I mention it here just so that you guys can see what it is. Right? So there is potentially a fourth one, but I would classify it as frictional unemployment. Okay. Now, there's another concept that we should sort of describe, which is what we call full employment. Okay, and full employment is a period of time where everyone that is currently wanting and able to work is actually working. Okay, the basic idea here is that there's no such thing as involuntary unemployment. Okay, so here, everyone that wants a job has a job. Okay, unless they are between jobs or they're sick of their current job. Okay, and so one of the things that we should recognize is that we will never be at 0% unemployment, and that's a good thing. Right? Which is typically a controversial position, to say that it's a good thing that there will always be some level of unemployment. And the reason why it's a good thing is because if we were at 0% unemployment, what that would mean is that there's no creative destruction going on, right? So there's no new inventions, and no one is leaving their current job to go get a better job, okay? And so there, we would say that that's a bad thing, because it means a very stagnant economy. Okay, so frictional unemployment can be a very good thing if people are unemployed while they're just between jobs, right? That's a good thing. So if you get a job offer at a different company, and you leave your job and for a period of time you're unemployed, that's good, right? We like that. That's a great thing. Similarly, if you lose your job because of a new technology that replaced you at work, it does definitely suck, or it's costly for you, but it's good for the economy overall. And so typically what economists will talk about is what we call the natural rate of unemployment. Oops, didn't mean to cross that out. Oh well. Also known as the naru. Okay, and here the natural rate of unemployment, you could consider it as the full employment rate of unemployment. Okay, and this is basically where the only people who are unemployed sort of by choice. Right? The only type of unemployment that exists is frictional. And economists quibble about what exactly it is at any given time, but we generally say that it's somewhere between 5% and 6%, depending upon sort of economic conditions. Okay, so generally speaking, 5% unemployment is a great number. Anything below that, right? So if we were below 5%, what that sometimes can indicate is that people are afraid for the future, and so they're basically hunkering down and staying in their current jobs, right? They're avoiding getting fired. They're not looking for a new job because they want to focus on keeping their current job because they're afraid of the future. Okay, so if we go below 5%, that can trigger alarms to a macroeconomist. Likewise, if we go above, let's say 6%, that can also trigger alarms because that could mean that it's becoming harder and harder to find a job. Okay, so 5 to 6% is generally speaking the sweet spot. Right? We always want to be somewhere between 5 and 6%. Generally speaking, there are exceptions to this, but they're few and far between. Okay, so the natural rate of unemployment is sort of what economists and policymakers at least attempt to target.